It was late afternoon. The sky streaked with orange and purple as the sun began to dip behind the skyline. A young boy, maybe 14 or 15, stood in the middle of the street. His clothes were a little too big for him, and his sneakers scuffed from the rough pavement. But his face was full of something that couldn't be ignored. Tears streamed down his cheeks, each one a quiet testament to the hurt he felt. His hands balled into fists at his sides, but there was no fight left in him now. Around him, a few people had stopped walking, their eyes on him, but no one dared to approach. The crowd wasn't large, just a handful of strangers who had noticed the boy's distress. Some whispered among themselves, wondering what had happened, but no one seemed to have the courage to intervene. They were unsure whether this was a private moment, something too raw to touch, or if they were witnessing something bigger than their own understanding. The boy's eyes, though, didn't see the people. He was looking only at her. His girlfriend, standing just a few feet away, her back to him as she pulled her backpack over her shoulder. Her name was Maya. She had been his world for what felt like forever. They had shared secrets and laughter, dreams of a future neither could quite grasp but both believed in. They had their first kiss on the swings at the park, their first fight over something silly that didn't matter an hour later. She had promised him they would always be us, that nothing could break them apart. But now, it was breaking apart. "I'm sorry," Maya said, her voice soft but firm. I don't think we're meant to be together anymore." The boy's heart felt as though it had shattered into pieces, each one slipping into the cracks of the pavement beneath his feet. His chest tightened, the breath catching in his throat. He wanted to call her back, to beg her to stay, but he knew something in him, something too deep for words, was already slipping away. "I don't understand," he whispered, voice cracking. She paused, her back still turned, but there was a hesitation now. Maya wanted to turn around, to run back into his arms, but she knew she couldn't. "Sometimes, people grow apart, you know?" she said, quieter now, as if trying to make the words less heavy. "We're changing. We're not the same people we were a few months ago." The boy felt the truth of her words sink into him like cold water. He wasn't the same. She wasn't the same. They were two people drifting in different directions, and neither of them knew how to hold on. In the silence that stretched between them, something in the boy's heart shifted. It wasn't a solution, and it wasn't a fix, but it was the first spark of understanding. This moment, as painful as it was part of something bigger. Life, in all its beauty and hurt, was always moving forward. As Maya finally turned and walked away, the boy stood there a little longer, the tears still falling. But something in him had started to heal. It wasn't immediate and it wasn't complete, but he felt something lift inside him. Maybe it was the knowledge that he was strong enough to feel the pain, to stand there and let it wash over him. Maybe it was the first glimmer of hope, that even in heartache, there was growth. The crowd that had gathered slowly began to disperse, and one woman, a little older, nodded toward him before walking past. "You'll be okay," she said quietly, her voice a quiet encouragement. He didn't say anything back, but he didn't need to. The boy wiped his eyes, took a deep breath, and began walking toward home. Tomorrow would be hard, but tomorrow would come. The next day, the weight of the previous afternoon still hung heavy in his chest. The boy, whose name was Jamal, sat by his window, staring out at the world going on without him. The sun was up, the birds were singing, and the people on the street outside were going about their lives. But for Jamal, everything felt muted, like the world had been drained of color. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected to be left behind, to feel like he wasn't enough. He had tried to give her everything, his heart, his time, his attention, but now Maya was gone, and he was left standing in a place that felt so unfamiliar. He tried to distract himself. He played his guitar, hoping the music could fill the empty spaces in his mind. But the chords felt hollow, the melodies out of tune. His fingers seemed to slip and stumble, like they didn't know what they were doing anymore. It wasn't just about Maya. It was about him. Jamal had always been the quiet one, the one who observed, who stood in the back, unsure of how to step forward. His friends at school didn't quite get it. They didn't see the quiet things, the small doubts that crept into his mind. Maya had seen those things, and for a while, she had made him feel seen too. But now, he was unsure of who he was without her. He couldn't bring himself to call her, to beg her to come back. Something inside him told him that it wasn't the right thing to do. Not because he didn't care, but because maybe, just maybe, he needed to figure out how to be whole again first. As the afternoon rolled in, Jamal decided to go outside. The street was quieter today, the sun warmer, and people were out enjoying the calm before evening. His feet led him toward the park, the place where he and Maya had spent countless hours together. It felt like the only place where his memories of her still lingered, sweet and sharp, like the scent of flowers carried by the wind. He reached the swings, their swings, where they had sat side by side, talking about the future, about their dreams, about the silly things that only teenagers could understand. Jamal sat on one of the swings now, his feet dragging on the ground, pushing him back and forth slowly, like he was trying to push away the sadness. But then he heard it, the sound of footsteps behind him. It was Maya. Jamal's heart jumped into his throat, and for a second, he thought he might have imagined it. He turned, and there she was, standing at the edge of the playground, hesitant, unsure. Her hair was tied back, and her eyes were softer now, like she had been crying too. "Maya?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She bit her lip, taking a slow step forward. I shouldn't have left like that. She paused, looking down at the ground before meeting his gaze. I didn't know what else to do. I was scared, Jamal. I didn't know if we could keep growing together, or if we were just holding on because we were scared of what would happen if we let go. Jamal's heart pounded in his chest. It felt like 1,000 things were happening at once. There was the urge to run to her, to forgive her, to tell her it would all be okay. But then there was something else, a part of him that still felt lost, still hurt. I understand, Jamal said, his voice steady but vulnerable. I don't know if I was ready for this, but I understand. Maya took another step closer. I didn't mean to hurt you. I care about you so much, Jamal. I always will. The words hung in the air, unspoken but felt deeply by both of them. For a long time, they just stood there, neither of them moving, the space between them wide and quiet. Jamal looked at her, really looked at her, and saw that she, too, was struggling. She had been carrying something too. I don't want to lose you, Jamal said finally, but I also know that I can't hold on if you don't want to be here. Maya nodded, her eyes brimming with tears again. I think I needed to come back to see you, to make sure that you were okay. I don't know what's going to happen next, but maybe we just need to take things one step at a time. We don't have to figure it all out right now. Jamal looked up at her, feeling the weight of their past and the uncertainty of their future. But there was something there, in the way she looked at him, not like a promise, but like a possibility. He stood up from the swing, slowly walking over to her. One step at a time, he agreed. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he believed that it was okay to not have all the answers right now. They had been through something hard, and it wasn't over yet, but maybe that was the point. Maybe the real growth was in learning to stand with the uncertainty, with the questions, and still be okay. With a soft smile, Maya reached out for his hand, and Jamal took it. Together, they walked away from the swings, side by side, not knowing what the future held, but ready to find out together, one step at a time. As they walked side by side, their hands still loosely intertwined, Jamal felt a quiet strength building inside him. They didn't have all the answers, and maybe they never would. But the weight of the world didn't feel quite so heavy when they shared it together. They had faced the storm, felt the coldness of uncertainty, and now there was warmth in the simple act of being present for each other. They walked down the path, away from the swings, past the places where their laughter had once echoed, and into something new. The future wasn't a clear map, but it was theirs to navigate, together, one uncertain step at a time. Days turned into weeks, and the air between them slowly shifted. There was no grand reconciliation, no magic words to make everything okay. Instead, it was in the quiet moments, the way they leaned into each other when words were too much. The way Jamal noticed how Maya's smile had a little more hope in it, how she had stopped looking over her shoulder, waiting for something to fall apart. Jamal realized that letting go didn't always mean ending something. Sometimes, it meant letting the other person breathe, letting them grow, and then coming back. Not because you had to, but because you wanted to. And maybe that's what love was about, learning to grow, even when it hurt, even when you weren't sure where you were going, but trusting that together, you could find a way through. Moral/lesson. Love is not about holding on tightly in fear of losing someone. It's about learning to stand together in the face of uncertainty, giving each other space to grow, and knowing that sometimes, even through the hardest moments, the future can still hold the possibility of something beautiful. Trust, patience, and understanding are the foundation of any strong relationship.